Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's the Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 3rd of January 2023. It's 10 past 11 UK time. I haven't had my second cup of tea of the day yet. That's because my obligations to you, the team, come first. So here it is. Here is the military aid and military equipment segment for this second video. Head of Polish Foreign Ministry called for the transfer of long-range missiles to Ukraine for strikes against Russia. So this is really good messaging from Poland. We've heard it from a number of people now calling in response to those long-range missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities, calling for Ukraine to have the equipment to be able to combat that, to be able to take these missiles out at source. We should respond to the latest onslaughts on Ukraine in language that Putin understands by tightening sanctions so that he cannot make new weapons with smuggled components, and by giving Kyiv long-range missiles that will enable it to take out launch sites and command centers. Exactly the correct messaging there from Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister. Right, France. This is a list of French aid to Ukraine. Equipment to be supplied to Ukraine in 2024. Not everything, says French aid to Ukraine. Now, there aren't often numbers with these. There are with some of them. But here's just a list of some things that France will be supplying. 3D printed spare parts, drones, 6 Caesar. So those are the self-propelled guns that are pretty useful, although there are claims that they're fairly big and quite easy to acquire as targets due to their size. You can actually hide towed artillery pieces more easily in like tree lines so that they don't get spotted, whereas you can't do that with these. So there is these are really good SPHs, self-propelled howitzers, self-propelled guns, but they do come with some ramifications. VAB, so those are, I think, armored vehicles. VAB spare parts, VAB Mark III. AMX RC-10, those are light tanks, wheeled tanks. At least 36,000 rounds of full-shot 155mm artillery shells. Asta, so those are missile types. Mistral, Crotal, all of those missiles. I don't know if that's the systems or the missiles themselves. 8 STZ mining robots, 8 EFA bridges, FAMAS, HK416. I think that's a logistics vehicle. Possibly, I could be wrong. 15,000 VCD-15, 2,000 VCD-10, 400 grenade launchers, FPV-98 Mark 1 Control Master 200. I'm not sure what all of those things are, but as you can see, that's one of those vehicles. They look really good. I haven't seen them in action, but these are basically amphibious vehicles that can have another vehicle parked on top of them, and they go for a little swim, get the vehicle across, and so on and so forth. So that's a selection of the equipment there that was listed above. I don't know what all of those pieces are, and I don't know how much of each of these they are receiving in many cases. But there is this understanding that France is doing more than people realize. They just don't advertise what they do in big repeated disclosures to Twitter, right? So some people think that France aren't doing very much. Actually, they are doing more than you might think. The question is, are they doing enough? I mean, it's interesting. There's a really good analysis from actually, I think he's a Russian economist called I've got him playing over here, Ilarionov. So this chap, and you can listen to his interview on Ukrainian TV with Privateer Station, who does the translating for it. But he says, look, if the US were to give aid at the rate Estonia is giving it, in terms of as a percentage of GDP, they would, which is like I think 1%, then the US would be giving $270 billion of kit. So, we think of different nations and we cut up these figures in all the ways I've told you previously. And we think, well, this nation's doing an amazing job, that nation's not doing a lot. But actually, some of these smaller nations are doing more than anyone else. And Denmark as well is another really good example. When if you see how much they've given, considering they're a tiny nation, they've been incredibly generous. And so, it would be nice if all nations helped out equally in terms of what they're able to give. And France is just one of these nations where I think they're always just going to get criticism, but there'll be an awful lot we don't know about what they do give. Senior German MP, so a member of parliament, demands that Taurus missiles and expedited F-16 deliveries blast slow repairs of German supplied tanks damaged in Ukraine to counter Russian aggression. Okay, so there is repeated calls now from people within German politics for Taurus to be given. Taurus is still not being given. That will be really good. Now, about that repair situation, there's a bit of a problem at the moment. So most of the German-supplied Leopard 2A6 tanks are currently in non-combat condition, as repairs take more time due to lack of spare parts. Quote, only a small number of delivered tanks can still be used in Ukraine, said German Deputy Sebastian Schäfer. That's a real issue. Spare parts need to be expedited. They need to be produced more quickly so that these tanks can be fixed up and put back on the front line. Now, talking about kit delivered by European allies, here's the Czech Republic's Dana M2 that they have given 26 of. 26 of these have been given to Ukraine, and these look pretty decent as well. And that's a fair number of these self-propelled howitzers. Again, we've been talking about Caesar, another 6 coming from France. Well, 26 of these have been given by Czechia, so that's fantastic. Ukrainians have received a Hydrema 910 MCV, so this is a demining vehicle from Denmark. On-road drives forward, but driver reverses seat to demine. Can handle 10-kilogram explosions. If it weren't for the Ukrainian army, most of the EU would soon look like this, says Peter Clifford. Anyway, units of the Ukrainian State Border Service were reinforced with new Zu-232 anti-aircraft guns. This is a gun I mentioned in the last video that there's footage of one of these units taking out a cruise missile. So I do wonder about all these different units and how effective they are, and there are a lot of these probably older anti-aircraft systems that you're thinking, how useful are you? What are the chances of shooting a cruise missile? Well, one that's been shot out by one of these because it's caught on camera. The State Border Service said the guns are used to combat Russian barrage ammunition and other targets such as drones, so useful against drones as well. Volodymyr Zelensky had a telephone conversation with Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister. Quote, in the last 5 days, the enemy has launched at least 500 missiles and drones over Ukraine. Thank you for the significant and versatile contribution of Great Britain to the strength of the Ukrainian air defense, in particular radars, advanced anti-drone systems and missiles. So some of those bits and pieces we don't hear too much about, like the radar systems, anti-drone systems, missiles, we often do, but yeah, a couple of hundred missiles given to Ukraine as a direct response to those cruise missile and Shahed drone attacks. Don't know what missiles the UK did end up giving or are due to give. I guess we might find out soon. And I've already talked about this, but in the previous video, but just to reiterate, at least one of the KH-101 missiles that was shot against Kyiv over the last couple of days was built in the fourth quarter of 2023. In other words, these are the most recent. These have only just been built. That then suggests that the Russians are using their missiles at production rates, because you would assume they would use up older missiles before they use newer missiles, because missiles do go out of date, so to speak. And so it makes no sense to use your newest ones and leave your older ones in stocks. So I would suggest that this data reflects the lack of missiles that the Russians have in stockpiles, and that also is supported by their infrequent use and by their sporadic use as well. So we saw a wave of drones, 35 drones the other night, that were not followed by any missiles. Now, if you had those missiles, you'd follow them after the drones, because those drones are using up the air defense missile stockpiles that Ukraine only have a finite amount of. There's no point, there's very little point sending those 35 drones in and not sending missiles in if you have those missiles. And since the next day they sent the drones in and missiles afterwards, the question is, well, why didn't they do that the day before? If you had that stockpile of missiles, you would send them on both days. So for me, it seems very clear that Russia do not have the stocks of missiles that I think they would like you to believe. And that is why we've also seen 3 months pretty much of hardly any cruise missiles being fired at all. Okay, Turkey is blocking 2 British Royal Navy ships intended for Ukraine. So these are 2 of the Sandown class mine hunters that have been given to the Ukrainian Navy. Now, Turkey is not allowing them through the Bosphorus Straits due to the 1936 Montreux Convention that states, and this is one of the most important things that's happened in the whole of this war. This war would look entirely different had Russia been able to get its entire fleet, say its Arctic fleet, down into the Black Sea. And goodness me, the Russian naval firepower in the Black Sea would have just been phenomenal. But closing off the Bosphorus Straits into the Black Sea, Turkey has as agreed in the 1936 Montreux Convention, has the ability to close that off to the warring nations' ships so that it kind of doesn't escalate things and keeps it relatively quiet. Now, that Turkey have not allowed these mine hunters into Ukraine, into the Black Sea, is not surprising at all. It is indeed what the Montreux Convention sets out. Some people are not taking too well to this, but it's the nature of the beast. Turkey is helping Russia and supporting terrorism, says Ukraine Battlemap. They sent a very small amount of military aid to Ukraine to make it seem like they are on Ukraine's side, which they are half for Russia and half for Ukraine. That's kind of true. They have sent quite a bit of stuff, and actually Baykar, the Bayraktar manufacturer, has sent more stuff freely to Ukraine, like has donated more stuff to Ukraine, as far as I understand, than other certain countries have given, right? And so you need to be careful about what you say concerning Turkish military aid. However, they do talk out both sides of their mouth. And they are laundering an awful lot of Russian money and very happily doing trade with Russia. If Turkey were entirely for Ukraine, then the war would be much worse for Russia. This is undoubtedly true. But I don't think they could do anything other than not allow those ships to go through. But there's also possibly another aspect to this. So Exit 226, I've interviewed Exit on my channel. She says, just because Turkey announced they won't let the Sandown ships in does not mean anyone asked to have them let in. Has Erdogan ever made other announcements to appease Putin? So this is interesting because I was quite surprised. Like, everyone knows the Montreux Convention. The UK and Ukraine know the Montreux Convention. So it'd be kind of bizarre if they went, yeah, you know that Montreux Convention. Well, can we get 2 naval ships through? They're like, dude, like, you know the rules. No. So I don't think they would be so presumptuous to think that they would allow them through. And there could be this. There is a theory presented by Exit here that actually the UK and Ukraine didn't ask to get them through, but it was announced by Turkey that they can't go through, making that announcement to sound all very on Russia's side, but actually it's not on Russia's side. It's basically the Montreux Convention. But if you announce these things in public, then could be a bit of messaging psychology going on. Yeah, Exit also says, and also technically these ships could be loaded onto cargo ships and sailed in without contravening the Montreux Convention. This won't happen either. These ships are not armed to repel an attack, and they'll be sitting ducks anywhere in the Black Sea. I agree. It'd be pointless having them mine hunters in the Black Sea. They'd just be taken out by the Russian Navy. Right, as there's no real geopolitical stuff to talk about, I'm just going to dip into this Times radio segment where there's an interview of Patrick Berry, who is a former UK soldier. He's a former captain, I think, in the UK Army. He's Irish, but a captain in the UK Army. He's now a senior lecturer at in security at the University of Bath. So anyway, this is what his views are: military aid. We're going to go through talking about a little bit about American politics. Bear with that if you're. But there's a really interesting bit on, I think, artillery production. So anyway, over to Patrick Berry.
Are you hopeful, Patrick, that America will approve fresh military aid for Ukraine anytime soon? Oh, yeah, I am. It does seem like, certainly the pattern before. Okay, these packages were getting more difficult and more difficult to get through. But it does seem to be based about internal political dynamics in the US, and especially the border situation, which is a pressing political situation there, and does need addressing. So hopefully they are. There are growing numbers of Republicans who are against funding the war, but they're still in the minority. And across the house, the houses they're in the minority. So let's see. I'm hopeful it will come through. The EU one needs to sort its house out too and get that money across. But really, it just needs a resource strategy out to 2026 at least. That's Putin's strategy, is to outlast the West. And what you've got to do, I would be binding in, if I was Biden, I'd be trying to bind in a whole pile of money out till 2026 that another president can't touch. Just release it now and show, because that's in American national interest. Flip it the other way.
This is a really good point, and this is precisely what Biden tried to do for 2024, well, actually 2023, for the next year. He tried to get that big $106 billion package in as one whole package, rather than lots of little packages that had to be accepted each individually. You do one big package, and that ring fences that funding for a whole year. Well, actually, Patrick Berry here is saying you need to do that to 2026. You need to put like a 2-year, 3-year package of support in for Ukraine, so that it's passed, and then if there's a change in administration, the other administration can't touch that funding that's already been passed.
If America can't fund it and Trump gets in, that's the end of the American empire, essentially.
I mean, yeah, it's a really good point you make about the need for longer term support beyond the end of this year, and sort of binding a future president to that.
Just a really interesting point. He says that's the end of the American empire. Just that big throwaway comment there.
Realistically, though, that's going to be a hard sell to the American people, who are already growing skeptical of military aid for Ukraine.
Yeah, they seem to be. People's memories are short, but the US didn't win wars quickly either, does it? It can win the initial stage quickly, but it's had to grind things out, and it's actually lost 2 wars, let's be honest, in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, it just needs that messaging, if you ask me. They need to be told this is what's in their interests. The economy's doing well. There's lots of employment. We're going to get the factories going. Let's just be. It's in our interest too. The other the isolationist thing, obviously in the US, it runs through history and always been there. It's very natural. What's different this time is fragmented.
What he says here is actually spot on. This is about information spaces and fragmented media spaces.
Natural. What's different this time is, fragmented media space where you can access any information that you want. And of course, malign actors are looking to divide the population. So, and I think really that's the nature of it, that, people are getting influenced, and for good reasons. They can say, well, why aren't we spending this money at home and all that? Well, if you want to be top dog, you got to spend money abroad.
It's just that throwaway comment is what I've been spending gazillions of words trying to communicate, which is that isolationism is all good and well, but if you want the US to be top of the top dog, you've got to spend money abroad. You've got to pay. You've got to pay for that privilege, or really, you've got to pay for that return on investment. And this is an investment. The US invests outside of its borders for benefit to people inside its borders. And you've got to understand it. So people that try to connect like the southern border to Ukraine, I think those two things are unconnected, and you only do that for individual political leverage that might be germane to whoever your electorate are, locally speaking. So you're going to see politicians do that, but those two things aren't connected, and people keep trying to convince me they are. Oh, you can't do international thing until your border. This is a border security thing, and actually you can do both things, or you can do one without the other. In fact, the US has been doing one without the other. They have been supporting Ukraine up to now, and they haven't sorted the southern border. The southern border hasn't been sorted for 40 years. Right, and they've done all sorts of things around the world. So don't tell me those two things are connected. They are not connected. Or you can sort the southern border and not sort out Ukraine because they're not connected. Or, do you know what? You can do both because they're not connected. Like, it really frustrates me. Stop connecting these things in some kind of logical way. They aren't. They are only connected because they've been forced together by politicians who want to connect them for leverage purposes. That is the only reason they're connected. But again, to go back to this idea, like the US wants to maintain itself at the top of the hierarchy, they need to invest in order to do that. And there's nothing more important at the moment in terms of that geopolitical landscape and investing in maintaining it than supporting Ukraine.
And let's say there isn't a deal on fresh military aid for at least another few weeks, maybe even as much as a month or two. What impact does that have? That gap in military aid to Ukraine, what impact will that have operationally on the ground?
Well, it's already having an impact because I think you're seeing that the rates of fire, for example, for artillery, because like say, we can talk about the artillery issue as well, where the EU pledged to get to 1 million, but it's only got about 300,000, maybe a bit more. The US is actually doing pretty well from a worse start in terms of its output. I think the air defense problem, where are those missiles going to come from and ammunition for the other systems? They're
Good
the
point.
two pressing ones. And of course, Ukraine then lowering its rate of fire, maybe rejigging forces around, having to move them. Rest and recuperation is an issue for the Ukrainians at the moment too. But look, in the long term, if it doesn't come, like Ukraine is a smaller nation with a smaller population and a smaller economy. It can't do it on its own. Simple as. And so you're talking about if it didn't come, you're talking about I would say in the longer term, so medium to long term, you're looking at the collapse of parts of the Ukrainian front and potentially a move towards they'd have to move to an insurgency, depending on what Russia's wanted to do. They're still talking about their maximalist aims of getting to Kiev, which I don't see the point of, but it shows you what they're thinking and how confident they are anyway at the moment.
And on the EU, you mentioned that they're by a long shot failing to meet their target of supplying 1 million shells a year. What do you put that down to? Is that purely production issue?
I do debate that a little bit. I don't know that you can say they are failing by a long shot because I don't think he would have that information. We know that I think it's 480,000 was the last figure. So he was talking about 300,000, but there's stuff that's been added to that. And then they are ramping up. And so you should see an increased production schedule. So it should gather pace rather than being a straight diagonal line. It should be like that. So there are chances it can be met by March. Probably unlikely, but I don't think it's as doomy as that. I think things are ramping up. But it's interesting what Patrick Berry says about the ramping up of the US being particularly good.
Issues?
I think it is. I think the difference in the US being able to, they were at 14,000 a month. I think they're over 28,000 a month now, the US, True. In terms of what they can produce. The US armaments industry and the factories are still owned by the state. And so the Europeans aren't. And so hence why if industry is going to invest a huge amount in increasing its capacity in terms of its workforce and robots, etc., it wants like a 5-year plan, not a 2-year plan, not like, oh yeah, we're doing this till 2026. And look, I think we're in
so that's really the nub of what I wanted to express here. Something I've talked about before is that private companies aren't going to want to ramp up production for shells. And we talked recently about production of munitions that are going to be replaced. And if they're going to be replaced, some people are saying, well, just produce a few more just at the end. No, if they're going to be replaced, what happens is you dismantle all the capital, all the equipment that builds that weapon, because you've only got a certain amount of space. So you dismantle that equipment, you get new equipment in to build the new weapon, and you retrain those people to build this new weapon. Then if someone comes on and say, oh, we're having a war in Ukraine, we need loads of that old weapon. Actually, you can't just say, oh, we'll just produce a load more of the old weapon, because actually we've already dismantled the equipment and we're retraining people on the new stuff. So it's really difficult. But it's not so difficult if you're a state actor because you're not interested in profits all the time. You're interested in the geopolitical gains more than in making profit. So if you have factories that are owned by the state, like in America, some of the munitions factories are owned by the state still, as according to Patrick Berry, then the US goes, right, you're going to ramp up production of this, and this. Oh, we don't make that at the moment. Get some freaking machines that make them now. You're going to do that, and you're going to do it for 2 years. Like, we need that artillery ammunition right now. Whereas in Europe, where they're more private entities, like the private entities say, well, we can build that stuff, but it's not financially viable for us to do that if we're only going to do it on a 2-year cycle, because to get that capital in place in these factories, that outlay will not bring us the return on investment. So we can only make that artillery ammunition to the levels that you would like if we can be assured a 5-year manufacturing plan. And if the nations aren't up for doing that, if the UK government or the German government or whoever aren't up for giving a 5-year contract to an arms manufacturer for that amount of time, then it ain't going to get made. And so that's why the US has been interestingly more reactive. This is kind of counterintuitive, more reactive because they've got state manufacturers than the private manufacturers in the EU, precisely because they aren't so interested in profits. They're interested in providing Ukraine with stuff for geopolitical, military, strategic reasons. And I thought that was an interesting observation from Patrick Berry there. The West must get serious. So moving on to a couple of geopolitical things. There's only two. Latvian President Edgars Rinkevics says, another set of brutal Russian airstrikes against Kiev this morning. Innocent civilians again being victims of Russian terrorism. Ukrainian air defense works well, but Ukraine must get more help. New Year's celebrations are over and the West must get serious and act now, which is great. And of course, it's about putting money where the mouth is, or munitions where the mouth is. Now, the Latvian president can probably say that far more easily than, say, the US president, or like anyone can say it, but can you actually do it? Well, the Latvians can probably do that more because they are right next to Ukraine and they've got much more popular support for that. And they are giving, as a percentage of GDP and as a percentage of defense budget and whatever, they are doing an awful lot for Ukraine. Other nations, it's more difficult. US being further away in the political situation they are in, and so on and so forth. It's more difficult to put your money where your mouth is in those political contexts. Right, here is a piece of news that's not too good for the UK. Doesn't look too good, at least for one of our entities. UK refinery owner extends credit facility with arm of oil firm part owned by Russian who is under sanctions. Okay. Bit of a mouthful of a headline. The owner of one of Britain's biggest oil refineries has extended a loan facility with an arm of an oil company founded and part owned by Russian billionaire who's under sanctions. SR Oil, which is a UK enterprise, which owns and operates a Stanlow oil refinery near the River Mersey in Ellesmere Port, Cheshire, stopped all imports of Russian fuel in 2022 in the aftermath of the invasion. And this is really cool. This has happened a number of places around the world. The decision came after unionised dock workers refused to unload Russian cargoes at Stanlow, which supplies 16% of UK road fuel, while the government later imposed a ban on imports that might benefit the Kremlin. Recently filed accounts reveal the company has extended a credit facility with Litasco, the oil trading division of Moscow-based Lukoil. So Lukoil are a huge concern, right? Russia's second largest oil company, Litasco itself, is not subject to sanctions. I wonder why that is. Oh, it's because we kind of need them, right? SR Oil UK, part of the SR group owned by Indian billionaire Ria Brothers, has a $500 million extended payment facility on crude oil with Litasco, the accounts show. The agreement is effectively a credit line allowing SR to buy fuel and pay later. In other words, SR, as this UK entity, which is actually owned by some Indian billionaire or an Indian billionaire or billionaires, they essentially borrow off the Russians here, and that's the issue. The 2-year deal came to an end in May 2023, but it's been extended until June 2024 before the money is paid back under an unwind and settlement agreement. Litasco is wholly owned by Lukoil, whose founder and 8.5% shareholder was placed under sanctions by the UK in April 2022. So why Lukoil aren't under sanctions, I don't know, in the EU and the UK, but they are in the US, as it says here. I don't know how that is. Anyway, SR's SR Oil UK's loan arrangement with Litasco has previously raised concerns in Westminster because the contract gives the company a charge over Stanlow Terminals Limited. In theory, this means the terminal, a vital piece of the UK's energy infrastructure, could fall into Litasco's hands if SR Oil were to default on its debts. Russia could, it's a bit like the Belt and Road initiative of China, like default on debts and a piece of UK infrastructure could end up in Russian hands. So anyway, this is all not looking good for the UK and for SR Oil. So hopefully some solution can be found there, or at least some regulation can be put in place to stop Russian entities having a hand in UK infrastructure. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. And I'll speak to you a little bit later. Toodle pips.